damages that can be sought, meaning the money that can be sought from a professional, are limited. So in Nevada, so-called non-economic damages for a medical malpractice cause of action are limited to $350,000. So that means damages for pain and suffering, damages for loss of consortium, damages for the loss of enjoyment of life, the kind of nebulous damages that in decades past and years past had resulted in monstrous verdicts in medical malpractice cases have been limited in Nevada and are in most jurisdictions. The number of attorneys in Nevada willing to take on claims against a medical professional are relatively small because the costs of bringing a medical malpractice lawsuit are very high. The average cost to a plaintiff to bring a medical malpractice claim, so for example, if using a terrible example, but if the wrong body part is operated on, if a right knee was called on for intervention and a left knee was operated on, for example, which is in our jurisdiction malpractice per se, even in that sort of a circumstance, the number of attorneys willing to take the case is relatively small because the costs to get that kind of a case trial ready are in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $500,000 between expert witnesses, costs of preparation, et cetera. And so the table I want to lay for all of you in my comments about the world of medical malpractice from a trial judge's perspective is that the world of medical malpractice is fairly hostile, at least in Nevada and California, two jurisdictions with which I'm relatively familiar. It's fairly hostile to plaintiffs who want to bring claims. That's intentional in Nevada, and there was tort reform enacted in, sorry? Was there a question? There was a court reform legislative crisis in Nevada in 2002. That legislative crisis led to a lot of the procedural protections that I just illustrated or outlined for all of you, to include the economic damages or the non-economic damages cap, excuse me, that I just described. An interesting kind of color item I would share with all of you about malpractice claims, at least as I see them as a trial judge in Nevada and to a lesser degree in California, is that patients, that's the world from which a juror would be chosen. Patients, like all of you, patients tend to identify with their treating providers. Patients tend to see the best in their treating providers. And so juries, interestingly enough, are very conservative in medical malpractice cases about when they identify, that is, find as a matter of fact that an act of malpractice has occurred. And they're very conservative in terms of the dollar amounts they're willing to put on awards. So as an example, a dental malpractice trial, a case that actually went to trial in my jurisdiction, resulted in a jury verdict of about $175,000. Now you might ask, how was dental malpractice valued at that amount? But it was in fact a fairly egregious case of malpractice that I'll use as an illustration or a story in terms of my advice for all of you to avoid a claim of malpractice. I've seen, I have active right now, I can't speak specifically about the facts, but I have two malpractice actions that both involve catastrophic neurological injuries related to stroke, either stroke misdiagnosis or a failure to intervene with TPA in an acute care, acutely evolving stroke incident. Those cases will likely resolve before trial. And that's sort of the final procedural observation I would offer to you, that most medical malpractice claims don't end up going to trial. If in fact there has been an error made, if in fact there is direct evidence of so-called malpractice, for the most part, those cases settle. So I see very few cases actually go to trial as a percentage of the overall cases brought. And so what are my comments to all of you as practitioners? What's the best advice I would give for all of you in terms of the cases I've seen? So in the dental malpractice case that was tried to verdict, that I tried to verdict, that I described to you, I believe the chief reason that poor dentist ended up being sued is because she chose to be dishonest with her patient. What I mean by that is she had engaged in a tooth removal, for lack of a better term, of an impacted molar, had inadvertently clipped the lingual nerve of the patient, and had not been honest with the patient either about the signs and symptoms of the sequelae of impacting the lingual nerve, or in her charting about what had occurred or had not occurred either during the operative event or in the follow-up in the few days after the operative event. The patient had come in, he was complaining of persistent numbness on one side of his mouth, persistent numbness on one side of his tongue, and the practitioner had not accurately charted either an actual evaluation of the patient or any findings related to her evaluation of the patient. And so in the cold, hard light of day, by the time it got to trial several years later, the poor practitioner on the stand was in a very difficult position to try to explain how her claims about carefully evaluating the patient, carefully understanding the patient's persistent neuropathy and numbness, and the symptoms he had described, which clearly illustrated that his lingual nerve had in fact been severed. All of that came tumbling down on her late in the game. And so, quite honestly, my perspective as a lay witness, the judge in the case, again with enough medical knowledge to be dangerous, was that had she simply been honest at the time of the event about what might have occurred, what might be going on with him, and about, taking that extra moment to actually document what she claimed she had done, the outcome, I think, would have been much, much, much different. And that message of documentation and just being direct with patients, even when you make an error, is perhaps the best message I can give. Now, let me hasten to add, I'm sure if you talk to your legal counsel will tell you, well, the last thing you should do is admit making a mistake. And I'm not here to give legal advice to any of you. I can only tell you, as a former healthcare provider who made mistakes, fortunately not often, but I did make mistakes as a nurse, but who made mistakes, and now as a judge witnessing the lawsuits that result as a consequence of mistakes, overwhelmingly, unequivocally, the best practical advice I can give is be honest with your patients about what goes right and about what goes wrong. Because candidly, more often than not, the devil is in the lies told, whether they're lies by omission or lies by commission. The bad outcome comes because people get mad when they figure out after the fact that they either have been lied to, or that someone's been dishonest with them, or they think they've been lied to. And so, to sum it up from a judge's perspective, the overwhelmingly best advice I can give is just talk to your patients and be honest with them about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what does and doesn't happen, even if a mistake is made. Let me pause again and ask if there are any questions. That's really a multi-day, multi-hour lecture distilled into just a few minutes. So I want to give as much option as I can to all of you for questions or specific questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions, or put it in the chat otherwise?
I have a statement. 3 words, well, however many words it is, standard of care. And I think that he and maybe some of you should elaborate on the problems that have come out of those words.
Sure. So standard of care is a community-specific term, and therein lies perhaps part of the challenge, right? So the standard of care in Reno, Nevada may be different than the standard of care in Ypsilanti, Michigan, or than the standard of care of Orlando, Florida. The standard of care in a medical malpractice case is established by your peers. So whoever the leading expert or the person who claims to be a leading expert, for example, in orthopedic care or in hormone replacement therapy or in choose the specific specialty that you're describing, it will be the leading proponent, the person published in the literature, or the person willing to take a position who's published in the literature who describes what is the appropriate standard of care. So Bill, it would be very interesting to see, for example, if you talk to the internal medicine docs, what they said the standard of care is for thyroid replacement. You know,
we're in your case, we're way off the chart.
Right,
So,
right. And, you know, the internal medicine guys would say it is outside the standard of care to be treating my thyroid levels in the way they're being treated, even though that's my specific request. So standard of care is a slippery concept, and it's one that you need to be aware of as you engage in practice, in your own practice. You need to know what the standard of care is, for example, in this organization, if it promulgates or discusses standards of care, what the standard of care is in the allopathic medical world, and where the slings and arrows are going to come from. I don't know, Dr. Fogarty, if that answers your question. Did you have other questions, or would you like me to elaborate more?
well, actually, that was the same thing that I had written down here about standard of care. And then I thought of, you know, you told us your story right at the beginning, and you know where you started, and then you know how we sort of took things from there, and how much better you felt. But again, and in one of my lectures that I had one of my nurses from a long time ago, and I got a letter from her doctor from back home. This was back home in Pennsylvania, who called me a quote unquote shaman and a disgrace to my degree. You know, what are you supposed to say? I kind of took it as a badge of honor, but you know, these are the kind of the pitfalls that we come across.
But Bill, if I may, the one thing that you do that I would suggest to your colleagues is a good idea is you and I have had frank discussions about, look, Egan, if you go to the allopathic medical community, talking specifically about thyroid treatment, you should know that what I'm suggesting to you is not what they will suggest. Because then, right, I make an informed decision about it, Bill.
Right.
I decide as a patient, okay, I understand he's described to me what the traditional standard of care is. I'm willing to accept something other than the traditional standard of care. And it's informed consent, right?
Right. Right. So, and I know we're all supposed to have everything, you know, signed and sealed and delivered, but don't always do that. You know, you get busy, you kind of sometimes forget those kinds of things. And
yeah, of course, if it's not charted, it's not done. That's the bane of all of our existence.
Right. So we had a lady who we saw in March of 2021, and then she came in again in June. And I hadn't signed the chart. Sometimes, you know, I hadn't signed the chart in March. I noticed that, you know, when she came back the second time, so I signed it again. So now all of a sudden that was a fraud. Well, it was just an oversight, so I just signed it when I signed it. But you know, that became a bone of contention because she said she was never here in March, even though we had written her prescriptions, and she was a new patient. I wasn't, you know, I'm not in the habit of writing prescriptions for someone I don't know, just you know, out of the blue. But you know, the chart was signed June 2nd instead of March 25th. So you know, these things kind of happen from time to time. So anybody else have any, you know, experiences, any questions here? You know, this is kind of, you know, wide open forum. So
I have a question. I have a question just because we just mentioned it, and that's informed consent. My understanding that informed consent only involves one aspect of the medical practice, and that is not for the patient to understand what is occurring physiologically or biochemically with them. The only required informed consent is for the patient to be clear on dose and dosage, how much to take and how often. The understanding is not even a requirement for informed consent.
You are correct about that, Dr. Burgess. When I was describing informed consent with Dr. Clearfield, I was using it as a term of description as much as a term of art. What I mean by that is, as a practitioner, you can protect yourself if, for example, I was ever to say, well, Clearfield gave me, this Armour thyroid that's I don't think that's controversial, but just let's say it was controversial. Clearfield gave me this Armour thyroid and I had some untoward sequelae, and
Call one of the
so
endocrinologists. Tell him.
I want to now bring a claim against him. If he can illustrate that he spoke with me about part of the rationale, whether I have a meaningful understanding or not about it or not, there is consent. Now, Dr. Burgess, what you're describing with informed consent is you have to confirm with me that it's okay for me to have you touch me, right? Or to provide a medical intervention to me. That's the narrowest sense of informed consent. But what I'm describing is having a meaningful conversation with your patient so that they can make a choice.
Well,
And that you can later describe that they made a choice.
Yes, that's really my point, is that we do not have meaningful conversations with our patients. And since those conversations are not required, I think it's a big black hole in the middle of our system.
I couldn't agree with you more, Doc. It's so funny. One of my kids had to have emergency surgery on his hand because he cut an artery in one of his fingers, and everything turned out fine. But when I read his chart after the fact, the hand surgeon said, "Oh, I clearly and in detail explained the risks, benefits, and downsides of the procedure and got informed consent." And no one spoke to his mother and I. Literally, no one spoke to us. It had not occurred.
So I guess a good question is always to ask, are there any questions to the patient?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Dr. Cruz. I have an anecdote area where, as a OBGYN, I've had two lawsuits brought against me. One was for an ectopic pregnancy, and another was for bladder fistula. And with the first ectopic pregnancy, we had done, I as the resident had done informed consent, and I went over infection, bleeding, injury to surrounding organs, and then I also include death because that basically covers it all. And the patient didn't have a problem after the procedure, but the husband had a problem after it. And he came back like 5 years later and brought a suit alleging that we had decreased her fertility, affecting his ability to increase their family, because she ended up losing her ovary, and then she had endometriosis, just a whole bunch of stuff. But the very fact that it even progressed to the point where because I was a resident at the time, and I was in Michigan, they had to come all the way to West Virginia, give me a deposition, and it went through the whole process, which was just a stressful thing that it's kind of you get tired that even if you give informed consent, you can still have the possibility of a suit brought against you, and then just even trying to defend yourself, and having the deposition, getting a lawyer to defend you, that's money that you're just like, why am I doing this? This is a waste of time. So you just kind of get tired of doing stuff like that. And then you document, as OBGYN in Michigan, you learn how to document everything to the T, because that was one of the biggest states that had high malpractice suits and high rewards for patients who did win against physicians. So that was one thing. So even if you give informed consent, it's not really protective against you. And Marie mentioned earlier about standard of care. And one of the things that we have been discussing is, as alternative medicine, medical therapy physician, practitioners, is to create a group where we create our standard of care, because as you mentioned, Judge Egan, that you can speak to the patient that what if you go to another endocrinologist and they won't treat you for the labs that we're looking at, but with our experience as alternative medical practitioners, you will be benefiting from supplemental armor thyroid and whatnot. So that's the big thing, is you can talk to your patients, but then some patients will just get a hair up their butt and see what they can do to punish you. I hate to say that, but informed consent, it is important to get it, but sometimes it's not protective. It's always just dot your T's and cross your T's and dot your I's. And I think creating a standard is where for alternative medical practitioners is where that protection is coming from. And then the other thing you had talked about with patients is, if you do something wrong, is acknowledge it to the patient, and saying sorry is a big thing that I think that they have seen to actually decrease the amount of lawsuits or malpractice suits coming against physicians.
Yeah, Dr. Cruz, thank you for stepping into the fray, especially as an OBGYN. It is a high risk area, I'm sure. And to your point, it is excoriating and painful to be sued. I can only imagine, especially with claims of professional negligence. And to be sure, no matter how careful you are, no good deed may go unpunished. But the one thing you said that I really want to emphasize, that I would emphasize to this group, is you can help each other. If, for example, you had a core group of quote unquote expertise or experts within the field of, call it integrative medicine or alternative integrative medicine, who are available to one another as peer experts, you could help in lawsuits if that was your desire, for purposes of establishing or supporting an appropriate standard of care. That's unequivocally a good idea. So the American Medical Association has, sub-practice areas that do that in cardiology and, neurosurgery, probably an OBGYN as well.
So, yeah, I think Dr. Cruz, you can elaborate more than I think, since Dr. Halasa's group working on something like that.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Just because, you get someone who practices conventional medicine and they're going to say, Dr. Clearfield, why are you giving this patient extra, thyroid medication when there is no indication? And that's not, according to that family practice magazine that you just got, it's not following standard of care. So, this is where we were talking that if we form a group that we understand that there are going to be practitioners who do, like who use bioidentical hormones, use armor thyroid, and all the practices that we as alternative medical therapy practitioners use. And then there's always going to be the people we have that bell-shaped curve of people who do regular alternative medical therapies. And then we have practitioners who do the stuff outside, which is where, we have like the light therapies, methylene blue. I don't think that's like in the mainstream of alternative medical therapies at this point in time, or some of the oncology treatments. But, it's all those, it's on the edges that's where we find, new innovative ways of treating our patients, and having them get some benefits from those alternative therapies. So just creating some kind of group that we have created our standards. So like what Judge Egan has said is, if we have those experts who come in and say, yes, he, she is following what any alternative medical practitioner would do, then someone outside the group who is not versed in alternative therapies, like the doctor who says that you are
Call me a shaman. A shaman, I thought that was a good thing, but if you look up in the dictionary somewhere, about the 8th or 9th definition, it says as a dweller of the dark arts. I kind of like that, actually.
so if he, as a uninformed practitioner, is not aware of the practices of the dwellers of the dark arts, then he cannot judge you to be not following a standard of care because he's just uneducated or uninformed regarding these therapies. And I've been using the example of a cardiologist coming to an orthopod and saying, you, Dr. Orthopod, you are not following the standard of care. And the orthopod is going to say, you are a cardiologist. Who are you to judge me in my practice when you have no idea about my specialty? And so we can relate that to alternative medical practitioners and anyone else who, anyone who comes out from left field saying, you guys, you shaman don't know what you're doing and you're not following standard of care. We can say, we are following standard of care. You just don't know our standard because you are uneducated as far as our practices are concerned. And that's where the protection is going to come from.
I don't know if that would that fly, Judge? Our standard of care, that's.
Well, fly is a difficult term to respond to, Dr. Clearfield. But what I would say is this: you can unequivocally help yourselves by having an evidence-based, to overuse that overused term, but an evidence-based college of opinion in alternative medicine about standards of care with different therapies, because then you have a rebuttal to the allopathic, the more mainstream version of, to use the, thyroid treatment example of internal med guys who say, well, if your thyroid isn't above your TSH isn't above a certain level, you shouldn't be getting meds. And you then have a rebuttal to it, because in a medical malpractice trial, it becomes a battle of the experts, your expert versus their expert. And you want to have people with expertise in the area of practice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So what I've been doing for a long time now, because we ran into this thing, I've been doing this for a long time, is I keep what I call my reference project. And so on my, for example, did we give you the Magicare, the plant sterolins?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, the plant sterolins actually act almost like Pac-Man, and they will surround antibodies and actually almost like a phagocytosis, sort of destroy them. They don't work that quickly, but they do work. They usually work. We, on average, if you don't know, will decrease the thyroid peroxidase antibody by about 50% in a year. So if somebody comes in with a TPO of 800, it's going to take a while to control it, but they do work. So for that, I have plant sterolins. I keep a register, and I update it every once in a while. It gets to be kind of boring after a while, but so if somebody comes in and says, well, what are we giving Judge Walker plant sterolins for? I can hit a button and I have 51 references just on that. And I said, okay, here's 51 references. Is that enough? I ran into a little problem with testosterone for women. It was the same endocrinologist said there was quote, there was no indication for androgens in women for any reason. So I gave him a database. I sent him a database of 873 references, and this was 4 years ago. So we've actually added to that. So I've been doing that on my own, just for because it kind of gets my blood boiling. Lately I do have patients that turn in their some of their prescriptions to be processed, and the insurance companies will send incredibly insulting letters, as when they say, we're not paying for this and we don't even know why anybody would prescribe this, and we're not even going to give you a reason why we're not going to pay for this. And one of them was it was actually a 52-year-old woman who's had all the symptoms of low testosterone. Her testosterone level was 4. Her free testosterone was basically 0. I mean, it was so again, I have a database, and I sent them. I have a letter already prepared, and it's got 37 different references, and all I have to do is put her name on it and whatever her client number, and off it goes. And I either don't hear anything and it gets approved, or I do get a letter back that it's approved. But so I've been doing that for a long time on my own, just because I have a thin skin, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and that's one of your goals of this organization, isn't it, Bill? I mean, one of the goals in the end is to establish a database, a library, a codex, a place.
Yeah. So we, this group's actually been around. Dr. Spear can tell us better than me, since 1972, I believe. It fell into some disuse a number of years ago, and we sort of been building it back. So so we're still kind of finding our way. I mean, technically we're supposed to be rheumatic diseases, but we've sort of taken in the integrative medicine group, and half the folks that you're seeing here are not DOs. We've got Dr. Kelly's a chiropractor, Dr. Zarin is a homeopath, and some of the other folks, I'm not even sure. I know Dr. Smith is a MD, and the 2 folks up in the upper left-hand corner are my patients. They're just good old folks. So we have quite a diverse. Dr. Crowley is a pharmacist. So we have quite a diverse group. And Dr. Marie over here is our biggest cheerleader. She even came all the way out from West Virginia to Las Vegas to our conference. She's just a layperson. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that came out wrong. But
We understand.
yeah. So that would be an ideal. But personally, I don't have the time or the expertise to do that. If there's somebody here who would like to spearhead that, that would be great. And we can get some structure and some guidelines, and I'm not even sure exactly what that would look like. What makes it a standard of care? I could write out my protocol and say, okay, here's the standard of care from the American Osteopathic Society of Rheumatic Diseases for hypothyroidism. Just because I write it, does that make it so?
Well, it does over time, and it does when it becomes more accepted as a practice standard, meaning by standard, I mean more replicated, and especially as you publish about it in peer-reviewed literature. And there's always going to be a fight. My favorite story about allopathic physicians happened last summer. I had a terrible mesothelioma case where an electrician is dying of this terrible, terrible disease. And a very well-credentialed, very quote unquote, well-respected cardiologist came into court and wanted to testify that he could opine as to the hour and date of this man's death. And I threw him out of court. I said, there's no science behind that, doc. Just because you say you're a cardiologist doesn't mean you can, or anybody could opine as to the hour and date of any individual's death. There's no science behind that. So to answer your question, Dr. Clearfield, I love the idea that you're building a library, I call it a codex, of the science which formulates the basis for your medical decision-making with your patients. And that is, over time, a standard of care. Doesn't mean everybody will agree with you about it, but at least it gives you something to point to.
Right. Okay. So Yeah. So for instance, one of my favorite lectures that I give is testosterone in women. And at the end of I put on that, I actually photocopied it, and it's on our slide. Right from the the doctors. I didn't retype it. I said, this was the real thing. And I said, okay, here's 105 peer-reviewed references from such disreputable journals as the New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association, Journal of OBGYN, kind of, on and on down the line. And at the end of the lecture, I said, I don't think 105 was enough. Here's another 175 more. So, and it goes on for, 30 slides. And, nobody ever looks at them, but that's, so that's sort of something that I just kind of did as a reflex. I don't know if anybody else here, has sort of, put together anything like that, but we could certainly use that as at least as a jumping off point. Because I do it for what I do. I kind of keep my focus, fairly narrowed. There's the, Dr. Spears, a little bit more of a traditional rheumatologist. Dr. Richwine does mostly osteopathic medicine. Dr. Patel, you have something you want to add? You're muted. We can't hear you.
I said, you have covered majority of it. So, I wonder the word alternative medicine versus complementary medicine. And because what we are really practicing is not alternative. We are just practicing better medicine. So we are complementing. And so we are not doing the traditional conventional medicine. But they prescribe thyroid, we prescribe thyroid. So we are not doing anything alternative. We are just complementing what is not being done right. And we are just correcting it.
All right. So
this is one of my opinion, that when we say we are alternative care practitioner, we are creating a problem for ourselves. But if we say we are integrative, or we are environmental, or we are functional, again, we are restricting. We are complementary medicine physician. We are practicing. Our practice approach is wider. We look at the various other factors, and so we are providing patient better care.
But an interesting question just popped up, Dr. Clearfield, in the
off label.
chat.
Right.
Do you want me to? Do you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna read it to you, but go ahead.
So the question is off-label prescription of medication safe use? And the short answer is yes, if you can show your homework, right? To this point about standard of care, when you discussed with me using naltrexone, and you pointed out it was an off-label use. You pointed out, which I believe to be true, that there are several peer-reviewed studies that you can point to that show there's a powerful anti-inflammatory effect from that off-label use. And so off-label use in and of itself is not a deviation from the standard of care if there is an evidence-based kind of basis for the use that you can point to. It is unusual. I mean, it does open you up to the question about it. And, we haven't even touched upon, this is now a patient perspective. So much of what happens in medicine is driven by money and not by what is best for us as patients, in my opinion. And so the whole off-label use is as much about whether or not pharmaceutical companies getting their share as anything else. That's just my opinion. Have I answered the question?
Right. I think so. So let me bring this to you. So let's talk about ivermectin for COVID. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I prescribed it. We've had very good success with it. Just this week, a paper came out that it was ineffective for preventing hospitalizations or severe COVID infections. It was in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was on a lot of the bulletins, and I'm sure lot of you folks might have seen it also. But if you looked at what they did, so our protocol was 5 days at a specific dose per weight, 5 days for with an acute COVID infection with several other entities. I mean, it was a whole protocol. The paper that came out said that they used lower doses than we've used. And I'm looking at the frontline doctors, the ones that are sort of at the forefront of this. Lower doses than we've used, and they used it for 3 days. But the headline was it didn't work. So where do you go with that?
Well, the legal answer is this. If you can't show your work, show the homework or the basis for a treatment that you're prescribing, you're always going to be open to the possibility that somebody, you don't speak much about it, Dr. Clearfield, but I suspect you take a lot of heat from your peers in the allopathic community here in Washoe County. This medical community is very well compensated, very powerful politically, and they don't let outsiders in very easily. That's just my opinion as a patient. And so if they found out, or somebody got a wild hair and said, well, Clearfield used an ivermectin, let's run him out of town on a rail, and tried to cook up a lawsuit. I don't know how they would do that. A patient would have to have a bad outcome, but nonetheless, try to cook up a lawsuit. Your defense is going to be pointing to the science. Here's my homework. Here's the why I have prescribed it, and here's the scientific basis for it. If you can't do that, I wouldn't prescribe it.
Well, I'm getting too old for that anyway. So if I can't do that, then I won't.
Yeah.
But like I said, so we're going to talk about plant stimulants. The Moducare is not the only one. There's a few of them, but I've never heard anybody, outside of our group, the people that we've studied with, even know what it is. And it's the one thing that I found, and I've been doing complementary medicine for 25 years now. It's the one thing that I found that will consistently control the thyroid antibodies. And if you don't control the thyroid antibodies, within 5 years of them, sort of sprouting up, you're going to have a destroyed thyroid. I mean, and then there's a point of no return at that point. So anyway, so another question is, can you use animal studies as evidence to support human treatment for humans? I think that's done, isn't it?
It is. The way the science of medicine plays out in the courtroom, you have to understand is this. A jury, strangely, is the one deciding whether or not you have deviated from the standard of care. And the way the jury does it is by listening to experts, competing experts. So the plaintiff's expert or the defense expert. And all of those experts are going to rely on whatever studies they think support their position, right? And of course, animal studies are a part of the basic science behind many medical interventions that happen to humans. So in the shortest sense, yes, you can draw analogy to animal studies, but it really comes down to how persuasive the science is that you're relying upon and how persuasive the expert is who's going to support your position about that use. Because you're, in the end, lay people, the jurors are deciding if a mistake was made, as strange as that sounds. And so a part of the challenge of medical malpractice litigation is simplifying it, condensing very complex biochemical issues, physiological issues into an understandable form. And that's as much about the expert involved as it is about the science, the persuasiveness of the expert.
Okay, the only thing I just put on there, this is where all of our transcripts and our videos go, aosrd.org/webinars. If you missed part of this or any of our other lectures from, we've been doing this for more than 1.5 years now, so we have quite a body of literature here, stored up on there. Yeah, with that, So one of my favorite stories, maybe you can comment on this so that everybody here, or at least all the doctors know, when you were a nurse, so you probably know, H. pylori is a cause of peptic ulcers, right? Right? No argument about it, no question about it. Well, in 1983, it was a Dr. Marshall, he was an Australian gastroenterologist, first presented H. pylori as a bacterial infection as a cause for, chronic gastritis and peptic ulcers. He was laughed out of the arena. He had his medical license taken away. He went so far as to make a slurry of H. pylori and drink it himself, and then have himself endoscoped to prove that that the H. pylori caused the peptic ulceration. And ultimately, 25 years later, he was actually awarded a Nobel Prize. So those kind of stories are kind of heartwarming, but when you're in the middle of it, it's not a whole lot of fun. Any suggestions for when you find yourself in those kinds of crosshairs?
Well, the only thing I would share with you is this, and I sort of wanted to open this up when Dr. Patel was talking. It's remarkable to me as a patient how narrow-minded we are in the United States about medical treatment. I mean, there are ancient cultural treatments. I mentioned, a treatment you offered to me when my knee was hurting, that is ancient in derivation and ancient in use. And there are all sorts of complementary, to use Dr. Patel's word, medical procedures and interventions from different cultures across the world that are just discarded outright by traditional medicine in the United States for reasons I can't really explain. And I guess the best reflection I would have for you is this, to kind of put a nice bow on things. So I've had the privilege of going to an alternative or an integrative medicine doc or whoever else who really genuinely seems to care about his patients in the sense of their outcome. And last week, you don't even know this, doc, last week, 18 months after I've had 2 total knee replacements, and when I came to you 4 years ago, almost diabetic, 2 weeks ago, I pulled 5 pounds over the national record in deadlift. And so what I'm trying to dive to is just do what works for your patients as well. I mean, you've got to have some homework behind it, some basis for it, but you also do treat, right, the human being and what works for them, right?
Right. So the other thing is I like to think that after all this time, like my mother used to say, I should know what I'm doing by now. So, sometimes experience, is a great teacher also.
And you have to have some bravery about it. I'm sure. I can't, I don't know. I don't know what you all, I don't know the risks you all take. I can't know them because I don't have the expertise you have, but you have to have some bravery about it to be sure.
Can I ask something?
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm very new to all this, but one of the things that kind of scratched the surface a long time ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I had a family that was telling me about Dr. Bradstreet. And apparently he was treating autistic patients and doing some alternative complementary treatments. And then he was found dead. They said, it was self-inflicted, but it wasn't. And then, I think I'm more concerned about those kind of consequences. I mean, I guess right before that, he had his, his practice raided after a judge had signed a warrant for some stuff to be pulled there. Do you know anything about, I guess people are asking me now that I'm kind of delving into craziness is what I would call it. I feel like I'm pulling back the sheet on the Matrix, maybe. Like that's what I feel like every day now. But I don't tell people that I'm doing that. Like people when they come in, I say, if I see something that I've learned that might help them, I want to offer it to them, but I'm very under the radar. I don't want to end up like that. I guess, do you know anything about what had happened with that person or?
That not anything I'm familiar with, but Judge, you mentioned about the year that I moved here, the urologist got shot or something.
Well, so I don't know if that is connected to the issue that Ms. Kiley is talking about or not, but I will tell you as a judge, I've practiced law. I was a prosecutor. I was in private practice, and I've now been a judge for 14 years. And so 32 years of experience in Northern Nevada. I don't know that a doctor's office has ever been searched on a search warrant by a judge. That doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. I'm just saying that's a very rare occurrence, is the first reassurance I would give you. The second is, physician, heal thyself. You have to know what your risk tolerance is and what you're willing to ride in terms of heat, however edgy your practice may be. But to your point, Dr. Clearfield, the year you moved here, there was a terrible case where a gentleman had, I believe he'd had a prostatectomy, a fairly standard procedure with fairly well-known consequences. And because he was unhappy with the results, came in and killed one of the physicians in the practice and mortally wounded another. The poor lady surgeon, was a surgeon and right-handed, and he blew her right arm off with a shotgun. And so it was a terrible, terrible, awful case related to, a patient's subjective perspective about a bad outcome. And it's just flat wrong for a patient to project their bad outcome onto a physician, which is, I think, what the OBGYN was talking about before. I mean, one of the risky things you all do is, projection is a natural human tendency. Anytime something goes wrong in somebody's life, it's inevitably got to be someone else's fault, right? The same is true in my business.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Nario. So we're alternative practitioners. So let's say, FDA or anybody who's going to come into our clinic would try to inspect what we do. Who should we recognize as authorities? And as practitioners, what should we do for this? Like, should we look for a warrant first before they go in? Or should we call our lawyer first before they get into our clinics? What are your suggestions for these situations?
I have to be careful not to give you legal advice, but I'll give you practical advice. Yes, you should call your lawyer. You should recognize the licensure of anyone. So you have a business license, right? So if the city, pursuant to the business license, wants to come in, you have to make your business available to them. If you have a medical or a professional license, somebody associated with the licensing agency, you have to be responsive to. But yeah, I would unequivocally, if somebody's coming in to inspect your practice, to kind of go over things with a fine-tooth comb and you're concerned about it, I would unequivocally get a hold of my lawyer.
Meaning they shouldn't come in and ask for documents first, or well, hold on, I'll call my lawyer before you get into the facility.
Yeah, I would try to message to anybody, look, I'm going to be cooperative, but I'm sure you can understand I need to refer to legal counsel before I actually respond to any of your requests.
Oh, so definitely not let them in and inspect until you call your channel.
Well, Doctor, the question implicates such a broad range. So the cops could show up at your facility, right? Say I have a search warrant. And if you tell them you're not coming in, they're going to break down the door. I'm not sure I would stand in their way under that circumstance. But if somebody whose legitimacy you question, or whose authentication you question, they show you a badge, or they don't show you a badge. They claim to be, I'm so-and-so inspector from so-and-so organization. I would probably tell them, look, I want to be cooperative and I want to be transparent, but I hope you can appreciate I need to talk to my lawyer before I actually reveal anything to you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Questions? So it was a little bit before my time, but Dr. Forsythe's one of our colleagues here in our group, and he speaks to us quite often. And I don't know if you were around when he had his trouble with growth hormone and the feds. Do you remember anything about that at all?
None of it rings a bell with me.
It was around 2005. I guess he was getting it from Israel, and they came at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, he's 82 now, so it was about 15 years ago. So he was in his 60s then, and you know, guns drawn to his house at 6 a.m.
Good gracious.
So I don't know anybody else on here from town. This was before my time here, so if there remembers any of that. I mean, if you type in HGH and legal, you know, and the law in Reno, I mean, it comes right up in the newspaper article anyway. So, okay.
I work with Dr. Forsyth, so he does tell me these stories.
Yeah, he talks about it all the time.
Yeah,
So
so it is real. That,
no, I know he talks about it all the time. So, but
it even came to the point that I think they went to his house to investigate something. But I guess the star of that show really is the clinic that he was working in.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so he turned it around on them, and he ended up writing the guidelines for you know, for HGH, you know, to the legitimate uses of HGH. I think that's what came out of that. But you know, I'm at the point in my life where I don't really want to deal with anything like that. You know, so
Understandably.
do my thing and go home at the end of the day. I don't really want to deal with any of this other nonsense.
Yeah, understandably.
So. Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments or, so believe it or not, you know, OMED, which is the AOA scientific conventions coming up at the end of October, and Dr. Burgess and I are going to have to start getting that together, even though we just finished with our Las Vegas deal a couple of weeks ago. I still don't have the videos if you're looking for them, so I'm pressing them. And we will put them up on the website with password protected, so you'll have them when they're available. I think Dr. Zarin wants to speak a little bit about you know, what we're going to be doing in the next week. Judge Walker, I can't thank you enough. It's been very interesting, and we had a lot of good information. I'm getting a lot of attaboys in the chat here. You know, we really appreciate you taking your time and you know, explaining things from you know, from your perspective, you know, from your legal perspective. And I'm sorry I didn't have the video one when you were patting me on the back, but it was getting to be kind of embarrassing, and I may have trouble getting my head out the door anyway. So we'll leave that alone. So
It's been a great privilege. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
Take good care, everybody.
Okay, so before you go though, so Dr. Zarin, you want to just say a couple words?
Hi, hello everyone. So Dr. Clearfield, you didn't talk about it in the beginning?
I didn't. I was waiting for you.
You did. Yes, I just want to thank Sir Walker. That was the most useful meeting I've ever attended. So that's, even though I am in Canada, but I have so many questions that I got answered. So it's similar, but I hope that it could be a little bit longer, that I could have some of my questions. So in regards to the next week, so I think some of you guys have already know, and Dr. Clearfield already announced it, that we created a course for the aftermath of hysterectomy. So this course actually is by Dr. Clearfield and by myself, even though it's coming from two different perspectives and views, but it's very compatible and complementing each other modalities. For example, I'm a homeopath, and in a homeopathic domain, for example, we do not give hormone replacement therapy after, such as hysterectomy. So personally, I work on different pathways in order to stimulate the endocrine system and the organs in order to make enough female hormones, progesterone and estrogen, for the state of that particular person after the surgery. So it would be interesting if you listen to our talk and see how compatible the talk would be. So, and by doing this, I know that Dr. Clearfield has a different domain, but as I heard his talk through our conferences, we are very compatible. And by doing this, it's helping the person after hysterectomy to heal much faster and actually healthier. So I hope that all of you can attend next week to listen to us and see how it goes.
Okay. All right.
Any
Anybody else? Any questions, comments, complaints? Dr. Smith, are you okay over there?
Dr. Clearfield, Dr. Patel. So I want to know your overview on what I said about complementary medicine.
talking, Dr. Patel, talking to me?
Yes.
No, Dr. Bell, you can answer that.
Oh,
Well, you know, I've always been of the mind that I'm not doing alternative or integrative or complementary medicine. I'm doing medicine. This is medicine. I'm not, you know, I
true
don't,
medicine.
you know, I mean, I read, you know, the books I read are available to anybody. I mean, I'm not hoarding anything, you know, just because, you know, Dr. So-and-so in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania hasn't opened a textbook since 1970 that was written in 1978, you know, and that's the standard of care. I mean, that you know, that's their issue. I just think of it as medicine. I don't think of it as a complementary or alternative. And that's kind of the that's kind of my starting point. Like I said, though, I've been keeping this reference project, and I get to it every when I get a spur. So in the last 2 weeks, I've gotten 2 insulting letters from insurance companies about, you know, they don't even need to you know, respond to. We gave the 2 women with you know, menopausal women with low testosterone levels and you know, low you know, and symptomatic low testosterone levels, and there's no need for that. You know, so he says our expert says that there's no need for that. I said, well, your expert is wrong. Your expert's no expert. I tell them right out. They don't like it. They don't like it. But I always get it overturned. You know, a small victory. I mean, so. But that's my perspective. Is that this what we're doing? We're doing is medicine. It's not alternative medicine. You know, we're osteopaths. They try to make it a distinction. It's osteopathic medicine, which is, you know, and then they kind of, you know, unless you're doing manipulation like Dr. Irwine and whatnot, it kind of loses something in the translation, I think. So you'll find more, I think, so more of those of us that have the sort of the same philosophy in the DO world and the MDs, but. You know, like Dr. Smith over here, we're breaking them down slowly. So don't be scared. We got your back. Don't worry about it. Okay, we have your back. So
Thank
you
you.
run into a problem, you know where to find us. Okay, you know where to find me and Dr. Burgess down at the left down here. He's a font of information also. Okay.
Yeah, I'm also a font of website names. So as far as Dr. Patel's concerned about what this is called, and I, like Bill and 1,000 others, have gone through holistic, complementary, alternative, integrative, all that stuff. But I did get a web name in case we ever need it, because it's also definitive of what we do. And it's good.healthcare. www.good.healthcare, because that's all we're talking about. There are ways I think we can prove it's good.healthcare, and I didn't bring it up here because I didn't want to get into a debate about it. But if you're going to establish protocols, you also have to establish principles. I think we have those principles, but we haven't spoken about it. And when Judge Walker said we can't make them agree upon it, I think we can make them agree upon it. And once we get them to agree to our game, we will set the rules, we will set the standards. But all these, you know, things like this are important. What is it? We're not stuck on the side. We're just practicing good healthcare. Another alternative would be ethical healthcare, but we own good.healthcare should we need it. And we also have osteopathicinstitute.com if we want to establish other protocols in osteopathy and document it and research it. We can do that.
And a little bit on the later side, I also own one called hoochimama.org.
That's it.
Just to let you know.
Wait, I was,
I,
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I saw it on a Seinfeld episode. I think Kramer was yelling with some sort of code word, hoochie mama, and I remember saying that would be a great web domain name. And I looked it up, and .com was taken, but .org was not. So guess who? I've never used it, but we have it.
At the risk of offending everyone, I will say I also have massageballs.com.
Oh,
It depends upon how you take it, right?
yeah, right.
So there's some things you can say and some things you can't, but good health care is something we can do.
Okay, so next week, Dr. Zarin and I will be presenting progesterone after hysterectomy from my perspective and from hers. Okay. And any questions, comments? So you hand paws out there. You got anything to say?
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Patel and Dr. Ortel. Dr. Kelly, thank you for being with us. And Dr. Cruz, thank you for participating. Dr. Sabani, thank you for being with us. Dr. Ching, as always. Dwight, and then our usual Dr. Renza, Marie. Thank you all. I'm going to sign off. We'll have this up as soon as as soon as I can get it up, usually within 24 to 48 hours. Next week, we'll be doing, like Dr. Patel, Dr. Zarin and I let you know. And if you're interested in presenting at OMED, please get in touch with either Dr. Burgess or myself. And when is that? October 27th to 29th in Boston? I think that's when it is.
Around there in the 20s.
Yeah. I think that's when it is. It's in Boston. I'm sure it'll be virtual also. And hopefully they don't chicken out like they did last year at the last minute. So anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. David, thank you so much for being here again. And whoever phone number is at the bottom right there. I don't know who it is. All I have is a phone number. So thank you all so much. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same station.
Good night, everyone.
Yep.